If you want to make progress in chess, but you still find that your rating is currently stuck right now, in today's video, I'm going to talk about a 3-step thinking system that will help you break through your rating ceiling. Let's go. We'll discuss the system right away in practice. In the opening, of course, it's important for us to simply follow the opening principles, complete our development, and castle. And the thinking system is called BAD. No blunders, attack, and development. No blunders means that we must carefully ask ourselves what our opponent wants and what threats they have after each of their moves. Attack. We carefully consider all possible active attacking continuations and ask ourselves whether they will potentially lead to something good or not. If there are no active attacking moves available, then in that case, we develop and coordinate our pieces and gradually improve them. So, I finish my development, bring out my pieces, and place the knight on d2. Here, for example, I didn't play the most, perhaps, principled system, but for understanding, it doesn't matter. And now, we are already moving into the middle game stage. The opponent isn't threatening anything yet, just developing their pieces and not attacking anything. So now I consider attacking moves. Attacking moves can be captures, checks, or some kind of threats. Here, among active moves, I can push the pawn to c4 or to e4. Pawn to e4. I'm threatening to play pawn to e5, and after the exchange of pawns, the knight gets to the center of the board, and the bishop gets a long diagonal where it can feel comfortable and exert its influence. That's why I choose the move e4 now. If the opponent takes the pawn on e4, obviously, what will he be threatening? By capturing the queen and the knight, so you have to take it. And of course, you had to count the number of defenders when we played pawn to a4. The opponent had 2 defenders. Or rather, I have 2 defenders, and the opponent has 2 attackers. Let's keep going. He simply castles. If I exchange on f6, there's no point, because he'll just bring in his other knight. So I need to develop the bishop. We use the principle of development. There weren't any good attacking moves. There were all sorts of exchanges, but exchanges don't really make much sense. He attacks. We retreat the bishop to h4, keeping the pin on the opponent's knight. Next. For now, we have, again, the only attacking moves available here are actually just some exchanges, so we really focus on development. I want to bring a rook to d1 and the other rook to e1. After the move bishop to e7, the position has changed. Now his bishop is standing opposite my bishop, and if he takes my knight, problems may arise because the bishop will be attacking the other bishop. And I don't want to allow that. I'll just move the bishop to g3 to avoid any possible blunders. In this situation, the opponent exchanges, we capture, and most likely he will now attack with the knight to f6, aiming at our queen, the first sign, or rather the first principle. If he had attacked, yes, we would have asked ourselves and moved the queen away, but for now, he's not doing anything. We place the rooks in the center, following the principles of development. Now the queen is under attack, so we can move her, for example, to c6 for an active position, or just calmly retreat to e2. Let's play it more reliably. We'll move her to e2 and place the other rook on e1. Or now, after the move bishop to d6, the opponent wants to exchange bishops. I'm not really happy with this exchange, so I want to place a piece in the center again, make an active move, or just stick to the principles of development. That is to put the knight in the center on e5, since my rook is facing the opponent's queen. And if the bishop takes, I'll recapture with the pawn. And there will be a simultaneous attack on both the queen and the knight. Obviously, to use this 3-step thinking system more effectively, you need to have a good eye for tactics, be able to visualize the board, and of course, notice your opponent's threats. But that's exactly what you're training for. That is, when you solve puzzles or watch instructional videos, you absorb some useful information, but then of course you need to apply it in your own games. Here, I have the next continuation. In other words, once again, the opponent isn't threatening anything yet. Got it? An active move, specifically attacking with the pawn on c4, is needed now in order to attack the knight and also to seize more space on the board. It's a very useful move, though not all attacking moves are necessarily good, of course. Some can actually be bad, but in this particular case, there are no problems at all. Now, I want to place the queen on f3 to improve the piece, because again, there were no threats. Attacking moves, such as attacking the queen with the knight on c6, just really don't appeal to me personally, so I want to carefully place the piece on a truly good square. So, if the opponent isn't threatening anything significant, and we don't have any particularly useful attacking moves available, then in that case, we should develop our pieces. Again, he offers an exchange. And again, I don't like it. So I want to place the knight on c6. Again, I asked myself what my opponent wants. He wants to exchange pieces. I refuse this exchange by placing the knight on a good square. The queen has to move. Maybe to k8, maybe to e8. The only correct... Oh, it could also go to f6. Actually, my opponent played quite correctly, by the way. Again, he offers an exchange. I don't want to trade queens, so I move my queen to e2 to avoid this exchange, to keep more pieces on the board. Here I can capture with either the f-pawn or the h-pawn to open up my rook. I think I want to capture with the f-pawn. It's a useful move. We capture and at the same time open the rook, attacking the opponent's queen. And in the end, when you carefully follow the three-step thinking system, your opponent is much more likely to make a mistake. That is, if we play without making any blunders ourselves, it becomes very hard for him to create any real problems for us. We always check for attacking moves and we ask ourselves what we can do and where exactly we can attack. And if there are no good attacking opportunities, then we simply focus on improving our pieces. Well, I play 5-minute games. For you, this system makes sense, of course, when you play 10-minute or 15-minute games. Well, there are no threats. Attacking moves. What attacks are there? Knight to e5, knight to e7, check. And of course, knight to e7 is a fork on the king and the queen. So you definitely wouldn't want to be in your opponent's shoes in this situation. We end up winning this game. He played well for a while, but in the end, it all led to a blunder. We start taking pawns. Well, maybe here I'll actually have to speed up just a little bit, since after all it's a blitz game. I'm attacking the pawn with the queen. Now I'll bring the rook to a 7 and we'll win the game. The main thing, and what is most important when we're converting our advantage, is to act confidently, to keep going steadily, and to activate all of our pieces, and if possible, to exchange pieces somewhere on the board if the opportunity arises. Now the rook is attacking the pawn on c7. Also the pawn on g7 is now pinned, and here I was threatening to take the knight on f6 because I have two attackers on it. The opponent has only one defense, since the pawn on g7 is pinned. We take the rook with the queen, attacking the pawn on g7. Yes, the only thing he can really do is defend this pawn with his rook. And here, you can simply play for Zugzwang, because sooner or later your opponent will inevitably run out of useful moves. And at some point, he'll have to move his rook somewhere. Yes, now we push the passed pawn, refuse the exchange, and ultimately, the rook gets distracted, and we deliver mate on g7. But if it goes on, we just keep taking and taking. With the pawn on d7, when it reaches d8, the rook will have to move away, and then it's mate on g7. Of course, maybe he can try for a stalemate, but for now, let's make sure we don't allow that to happen. He'll take the queen from the board, and after that, we'll checkmate our opponent with a brilliant move. Now let's see what level of accuracy we managed to actually achieve, in fact, as a result, using this three-step thinking system. But of course, the opponent is clearly acting unsportingly, deliberately stalling for time, not resigning at home, and he just left the game. So what does that mean? Thanks to this three-step thinking system, our accuracy in this game was 94. And now, let's play the French defense as black in a sample chess game against the move e4, and we'll also be using the bad system. Well, the opponent is just messing around. All right, whatever. I'm not particularly interested in that. I just keep developing my pieces. I take control of the center whenever possible. I bring out my other knight. I carefully develop my bishop on the board, and eventually I get a good position strategically. Let's immediately put the knight on e7, defending my own piece. I can attack the bishop that's on d5. Exchange once, bring out your bishop to an active square and castle. After that, we enter the middle game. And from here, we start asking ourselves questions. After the move, bishop to e3, what does my opponent want? He increased the pressure on the c5 pawn and created a threat to capture it. So, first of all, I need to check my own active continuations. Can I take the pawn? Or I could move the queen to b6, for example, to simultaneously attack both b2 and d4 on the board. But in that case, he can simply defend with his queen to d2. And I don't really like how the queen stands in that position. So I think I'll just capture so that my pawn isn't under attack and continue developing my pieces, because right now there are no active threats. Let's move the bishop to d7, bring out the rook, and just keep developing our pieces. Now the queen on b6 will feel a bit more comfortable because there are no captures and the queen won't come under attack. And it's on the queen side that my pieces are well positioned. It's worth mentioning that, in particular, this system works especially well at the amateur level, where you don't need to complicate your play to achieve success in your games. What's important is not to blunder your pieces in one move. In other words, to make fewer mistakes than your opponent. Take advantage of your opponent's mistakes, carefully look for good attacking continuations you might have, see if you can win something from your opponent, and follow the principle of piece development. Try to make sure that all your pieces on the board are well placed. My opponent is defending the pawn on b3, so I need to find a way to make further progress. Among the attacking moves, there is knight b4 with the threat of going to c2, and there is also the move knight f5 to attack the pawn on b3. If we don't like these moves, then for now, for example, it wouldn't be bad to play the rook to c7 in order to bring the other rook to c8, which currently isn't active yet. But I like the move knight b4 to test the opponent and create a threat for them. It's not just some pointless or meaningless leap forward with the knight. You really can't chase it away from there. So it's actually a kind of outpost for the knight, a stronghold, a secure position, and it feels absolutely great for the knight to be there. Well, and then we continue doubling up. I think that probably, perhaps in this position, through c6 would be better to put the rook on c8, so that later on, if needed, the queen could also go to c7. This would help to line up the pieces along the c-file. My opponent shouldn't have exchanged the light-squared bishop at the start of the game. Usually white needs it to attack the king side, but as you can see, without that bishop, my opponent can't achieve anything here. And now, when all my pieces are well placed and I'm still not under any threat, I start looking for attacks. I like the move knight to c2 because I've done everything to prepare for it. I've doubled my rooks, now I place the knight on c2. The opponent carefully defends the pawn on b3. So far, my opponent is doing a decent job defending. What useful things can I do? Of course, I could exchange bishops, but I don't really like that trade. I could try to activate and mobilize my queen, send it forward, specifically to b4, so I can gradually and carefully bring as many of my pieces as possible to my opponent's side of the board, thereby steadily increasing my pressure. I could have also placed the queen on c7. Maybe that would have been a bit stronger at this moment. And then maybe push the pawn to b5, also considering active moves. But in any case, my opponent is facing difficulties now. He offers an exchange, which is generally the right approach. That's correct. In other words, he wants to trade off my active piece, to remove it from his side of the board. I can exchange for the bishop, or I can exchange for the knight. But in this particular case, I really want to take the bishop, mainly because it's such a reliable and consistent defender in my opponent's position. We then move the rook to c3 in order to invade his camp and put additional pressure on his defenses. Also to activate the piece. We're not falling into any forks. Yes, my opponent has the move knight to d3, or maybe knight to c2. But for now, this doesn't pose any real danger. He is defending very solidly and carefully, and since we still do not have any immediate threats on the board, we should look for either a possible attack or further development among the available attacking moves. There's the move bishop to g5, to place the bishop on a good square and attack the knight twice, threatening to take the pawn. Or you could try playing b5 to force him to capture and activate the light-squared bishop. I like this option more because the light-squared bishop isn't feeling great right now. At the moment, it's not in a very good position, and I want to improve its placement. After the move knight to c2, my queen was under attack, so I moved it away. The bishop goes to b5. It starts firing along the diagonal. We chased away the queen. Well, I very carefully move it all the way back to c7. Now, I have 3 heavy pieces all lined up together on the same open file, giving me a strong position. The bishop can also go to a 4, which allows it to pin the knight. But my opponent makes a blunder. Of course, we ask ourselves what he wants. but he blunders a piece in one move because my rook is placed actively, and I can calmly take it that very night. These are exactly the kinds of mistakes that most often happen at the amateur level when I analyze games with my students. If you use this system well, if you pay very close attention to your opponent's potential threats and develop your pieces in a logical manner, and if you attack at just the right moment, then everything will go great for you. Now you can gradually start exchanging pieces. Let's move the rook to c1. He doesn't take it because there would be a double attack on the king and the rook. His knight goes on the attack somewhere forward. You can bring the bishop to the d3 square, attacking the rook and forcing him to exchange. Plus, the bishop will also participate in defending my king. Although, of course, the opponent's piece alone isn't enough to launch an attack. But still, it won't hurt to have it. And now there's a situation where if we move the queen to f4, he'll cover with a pawn, and then we put the queen on f3. In that case, the queen will be standing opposite the other queen, and he'll be able to win it with a discovered attack. So first, I'll chase away the opponent's queen from here by playing bishop to g6. And we'll see that, in fact, the queen has no moves right now. It's blocked by its own knight, and now he'll have to give it up with check. This was also an active attacking continuation that needed to be considered. Well, you can simply move the pawn forward to h5. Keep driving the queen away from here, because you need to activate everything as quickly as possible. Let's move on. Let's keep going. The bishops are doing a great job supporting their pawns. We send the rook to attack the opponent's king. And in the end, it's important now for the queen to get to the f4 square. We attacked the king, and eventually the rook made it to the square. c1. And thus, at this point, the opponent gets checkmated here. But here, in this position, we take absolutely everything, capturing with the queen, and finally the rook goes to the first rank. We checkmate the opponent in this way. Now, let's check what accuracy the bar system allowed us to achieve in this game. Let's load it now. 92.2. That's also quite a good result. Very nice. I sincerely hope that you will make the most of this opportunity and productively and thoughtfully use the BAT system in your games. You really need to hone it and try to consistently control yourself from game to game, from one game to the next. Easy. It won't be easy at first, but if you stick to this thinking system, checking what your opponent wants, asking what ideas and threats they have, and checking your own attacking moves. And if there aren't any particularly useful ones, then in that case, focus on development, bring out all of your pieces, try to place everything on good squares, and don't forget about anyone. I assure you, you will make progress in chess.